Andrew Wyeth was an American realist regionalist painter who lived from 1917 to 2009. His paintings elaborated on the daily life, rituals, and appreciation of regional life in his hometown of Chaddsford, Pennsylvania, as well as parts of Maine. Wyeth's paintings incorporate a lot of muted colors, but his attention to detail was rivaled by few. However, the process of revealing minute details in his paintings to the observer did not always translate into the way he went about treating his life and career. From the year 1971 until 1985, Wyeth compounded a series of artworks of his neighbor, a German girl by the name of Helga 240 times without the knowledge of many family or friends. For Andrew, it was art, and the two persons engaging in this act never spoke of anything more than their relationship as artist and model. One of the challenges that one faces when looking at the Helga series is understanding what they mean as a whole. They could be celebrating beauty or winter or the way light hits a person, but knowing Wyeth, the series could also just be an ode to Helga's daily life. The viewer must not give up at this point, though, because, as author of Interpreting Art Terry Barrett states, artworks are always about something. So, after 2 hours of viewing artworks from the Helga series and categorizing them as one might see fit, I began to realize how strikingly similar my categories were to the 5 stages of grieving. With no other influence of outside information about the artist, I will introduce the viewer to multiple stages of grief as depicted in the Helga series. When looking at Wyeth's Helga series, one will begin to see patterns in how and where the artist places his subject, generates mood between contrasting values, and inserts a variety of emotion in the subject, resulting in an infinite number of interpretations for the viewer. However, through the use of varying emotion and repetitive design elements, Wyeth reveals a striking similarity to the 5 stages of grieving in his Helga series. Before moving forward, one must answer an essential question. What are the 5 stages of grieving? The 5 stages of grief include denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Each stage will be discussed and expanded upon when interpreting pieces of Wyeth's Helga series. Much like Wyeth's paintings, the 5 stages of grief are not always demonstrated in the prescribed order. This helps explain why Wyeth did not paint a series of paintings dealing with denial before moving on to, quote, angry paintings. He assumed the role of human before painter by expressing in each painting that sometimes there are good days and sometimes there are bad days. In order to note the validity of this argument, the presenter will consistently engage in 5 activities relevant to interpretation: describing, analyzing, interpreting, judging, and theorizing. It is important to remember, all activities of describing artwork are much like the 5 stages of grief in that they are all interrelated, yet all interdependent. In front of the viewer are 2 artworks from Wyeth's Helga series. The first is a drawing of Helga Testorf done in 1971. It was Wyeth's first drawing of the German model. The picture on the right is a watercolor of Helga titled Refuge and serves as the last picture in the series. Over the course of 15 years, Wyeth would create over 240 paintings and drawings of his model, and as one can see from his first artwork to his last artwork, there is a wide range of emotion. No other artwork in the series seems to evoke quite as much variety of emotion as the one titled Braids, painted in 1979. The viewer notices the subject Helga in deep thought, but it is difficult to explain what she is feeling. Is she in denial? Is she stewing over something, or has she finally accepted something? This painting gives us a place to start as we look towards other contexts in which the subject is painted. Much like Helga's portrait in Braids, it is of the utmost importance for the viewer to understand how each painting can depict multiple feelings and stages of grief, which is what makes the mystery behind Wyeth's painting so enjoyable to interpret. Denial. Denial can initially help someone in surviving a loss. Life may seem like it makes no sense or has no meaning. A feeling of numbness may be experienced, and one may not believe that what happened actually happened, almost as if a mistake has been made. Instead of being overwhelmed, denial helps pace feelings of grief. Wyeth's painting on the left, titled Capecoat, is similar to his painting on the right, titled In the Orchard. In each case, the subject is planted behind or up against a tree. This is common in numerous other paintings of his model Helga. As the viewer looks upon the subject, one notices the positioning of her body turned away from the viewer and with very little expression on her face. She assumes an informal relationship with the viewer. As for the gaze on her face, it is similar to the one we see in Braids, referenced in the top left of the slide. This informality is common in just about all of Wyeth's paintings of Helga, whereas in other paintings outside of the series, Wyeth has painted subjects who look directly at the viewer, like in his painting titled Young Swede. The placement of Wyeth's subject behind the tree encourages the narrative of something that is trying to stay hidden. Although Wyeth's professional relationship with his model, Helga, was kept a secret for 15 years, and could easily be associated with hiding her away, the expression on Helga's face tells the viewer she has not come to terms with something. Other words that may be useful in describing her gaze would be pensive, undecided, and one of reflection. The subject, not yet ready to face something, a realization perhaps, hides behind a tree until the answer comes to her. She does not want to be found, because it is her time to think and to come to terms with something. Anger. Anger evokes feelings that cause one to ask themselves, why me? Life is not fair. It causes one to question his or her own beliefs about death. It is healthy to express anger because it binds us to reality. Feeling anger may cause someone to feel like they are alone in the world. When one looks at the painting titled Letting Her Hair Down, the viewer sees Helga placed in the left two-thirds of the painting. A stark contrast of dark and light is evident as she sits next to a window, nude, with her arms crossed just below her breasts. It is not yet fair to assume her shoulders are hunched until the viewer looks to the right at Wyeth's painting titled Page Boy, 1979, in which Helga sits with slightly hunched shoulders, bundled up in her dark green Loden coat. The viewer cannot help but feel a sense of suspense in each painting, but why? On the left, Helga's arms are crossed, and the brow of her forehead appears to be in somewhat of a frown, darkness and light feuding with one another. On the right, Helga's expression is blank, but her jaw assumes a slight clenching underbite, a sign that she is anything but relaxed. The use of light and dark causes the viewer to observe darkness creeping over the subject, although it is unfair to discount the possibility that light is overcoming the darkness. Helga's pose suggests the former, in that the subject cannot get past something, much like her portrait suggests in Braids, depicted again in the top left corner of the slide. We see her shoulders with a similar hunch in that portrait as well. We observe the potential for anger. Bargaining. Bargaining involves a false sense of hope. Feelings of guilt may be experienced, resulting in what-if statements. What if I left the house 5 minutes earlier? An action often associated with bargaining may involve attempting to make deals with a higher power. The viewer is not given a straight answer as to whether Wyeth's subject is bargaining for anything. As one looks to Wyeth's painting Braids again, Helga sits deep in thought. What tells us she is deep in thought is the fact that there are no discernible distractions in the background. The viewer is forced to think beside Wyeth and his model. We see a similar development in Wyeth's work titled Sheepskin. Again, Helga's expression is illuminated, indicating that she is what the viewer should be focused upon. This time, however, she is looking down, hands crossed and slightly slumped forward in her chair. She still appears to be without an answer to her dilemma, and doesn't seem too thrilled about it. Are her hands telling us everything? A prayer, maybe? Or possibly her furrowing gaze, which indicates a sense of worry. These are expressions and types of body language that suggest the subject is reaching beyond herself for an answer. Elements in Wyeth's Helga series that are revisited time and time again. Depression. Depression is the accepted form of grief. Feelings of emptiness and withdrawal from life can occur. Things such as feeling numb, being in a fog, and not wanting to get out of bed are common symptoms. If Wyeth depicted one thing more evidently in the Helga series, it was the stage of depression. In the painting on the left titled Sleeping Helga, the viewer notices a figure lying down horizontally on a bed. It is Helga, and she is turned away from us. Above her is a low-hanging ceiling, and beyond her, darkness. The palette used by Wyeth is completely limited to dark umbers, whites, and siennas. One's observation of the subject tells the viewer the subject wants nothing to do with them. Being in the bed serves the interpreter with the obvious connection to the previous definition regarding depression. Less obvious is the fact that the ceiling seems to be pressing down upon the subject, closing in on her. Nothing but darkness behind her, ready to swallow her up. As the viewer takes notice to the painting on the right, one will observe Helga sitting, again, behind a tree, a common theme in Wyeth's Helga series. Rather than standing this time, Helga is sitting, her body blending in with the tree and the earth. The viewer sees her face, hair, and part of her legs. In comparison to the picture on the left, Helga is now being swallowed up by the darkness. Again, she is behind a tree, thinking and hiding. If one were to walk by the tree, they may not even notice her there. Her position sitting tells us she is there for the long haul, or perhaps she cannot will herself to get up as one with depression might experience. In respect of artworks being all interrelated and interdependent, one might wonder if depression is the feeling that Helga is mulling over in the artwork titled Braids in the top left of the slide. Acceptance. Acceptance is the sense that everything is going to be okay. One begins to re-enter reality. It involves adjustment, readjustment. There are good days and bad days. Wyeth depicts acceptance as it is related to the grieving process in the paintings Load and Coat on the left and Night Shadow in the middle. First, what we observe in Load and Coat is Helga walking towards what appears to be Kerner Farm, where Wyeth would later paint Snow Hill. Significantly enough, Wyeth's painting in Snow Hill is also interpreted, by this interpreter, as being a full-on acceptance of his own death, as he paints what appears to be a celebration at the top of a hill. Helga included in that celebration. Helga in this painting has her back turned towards the viewer, almost as if she doesn't even know she is being painted. She is going about her daily routine, something Wyeth was excellent at depicting. The fact that she is moving about and living her life tells the viewer she accepts that there are good days and bad days, but that doesn't keep her from living her own reality. Whatever happens before or after her walk is subject to another painting, but for now, she accepts her own reality. In Night Shadow, one of the most famous of the Helga series, Helga is depicted from her thorax to her head, laying horizontally. Blackness surrounds her illuminated body. A shadow is cast over her eyes. Could this be an acknowledgement of death? If it is, then the artist and model are telling us death is there and out in the open, and in order to do that, one must accept it. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. All evident, all interdependent. Wyeth's Helga series gives the viewer numerous avenues for interpretation. For this viewer, grief is illustrated through the placement of the subject and the relationship she has with the viewer, often informal, but certainly consumed by each moment. Wyeth's artworks are telling us something about life, whether intentional or not. His Helga series reassures us all that we too can make it through our own grieving, because let's face it, there are always good days and there are always bad days.